Before we begin this amazing Wild West tale, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Globe Showing Americas, drop a comment below. Maybe you're in Dallas, USA, Lahore, Pakistan, or London, UK. It's always a joy to see how far these stories travel across the world. The desert twilight was a canvas of copper and fading rose when Caleb Whitlock pulled his weary horse down the Arroyo path. The day had been long, and the silence weighed heavier than the saddle leather creaking beneath him. Dust curled in the air, glowing like embers in the low sun. He had thought the evening would pass without incident, just another page in the long book of his solitude. But then he heard it, the faintest cries, like wind snagging on thorns, drifting up from the dry creek bed. At first, he thought it was the call of some night bird, but the sound carried pain in it, thin, human, desperate. Caleb dismounted, boots crunching on stone, and stepped into the shadows below. There, bound with coarse rope and bruised by careless hands, lay two Apache girls. Their small figures were curled like broken reeds, their eyes wide with fear. One was little more than a child, 12, perhaps, her cheeks streaked with dust and tears. The other, older, maybe 17, carried in her stare the sharp defiance of someone who had already learned too much of cruelty. Their wrists were raw, their clothes torn. Abandoned by the drunken bounty hunters who had likely meant to trade them, they had been left like cast-off burdens in the desert silence. Caleb's throat tightened. He felt the shame of his own kind pressing down on him, the cruelty of men he'd once drunk beside. Still, his hands worked gently as he cut their ropes. The younger clung to him instantly, trembling, while the elder kept her eyes lowered, suspicion carved deep into her face. "Easy now," Caleb murmured, though his voice was more prayer than comfort. He lifted them one by one onto his horse, and they rode toward town beneath a bruised sky. But as soon as the lamps of the settlement came into view, another storm brewed. Townsfolk gathered in the dusty street, their faces a gallery of whispers and judgment. "Look there, Whitlock's got savages with him," Clara Hensley muttered from the saloon porch, her voice carrying like poison on the wind. Others joined the murmur, a low rumble of disdain. Sheriff Boone Carter strode out, hand resting heavy on his belt. His eyes took in the sight, narrowing. "Caleb," he said gruffly, "you best not stir up more trouble than this town's already got. Folks won't stomach you keeping them girls." The weight of all those stares burned hotter than any branding iron. Caleb swallowed hard. He felt his face heat, shame curling in his chest. The younger girl clutched tighter at his coat, while the elder turned her head away, as if to spare herself the humiliation. He knew then he could not leave them to the town's mercy. He led them away, back down the road, past fields silvered by moonlight. At his ranch, he set them in the old barn, laying down blankets and a loaf of bread. He spoke little, for words seemed too brittle in the face of their silence. Instead, he fetched water, washed their cuts with trembling hands, and left them space enough to breathe. The days that followed passed slowly, like river stones turned in the current. The elder, Nayeli, carried herself with sharp pride. She resisted his help, accepting food with a stiff nod, fixing him with eyes that seemed to weigh his very soul. The younger, Talisa, was softer. She hummed little tunes in a voice that lifted like birdsong, filling the barn with fragile light. Caleb found himself drawn into their quiet. He showed Talisa how to twist rope with nimble fingers. Her laugh, bright, startling, shook the dust from his spirit. Nayeli, though guarded, surprised him one morning by sewing up a tear in his sleeve, her needle moving swift and sure. He said nothing, but her eyes flickered, catching his gratitude. At night, he would leave bread by their door. In return, he found a barn swept clean, their presence shaping his world into something gentler. It was not friendship yet, nor family, but something unnamed and quietly binding. But the town would not forget. Clara's gossip spread like prairie fire. Whitlock's gone soft, keeping Apache strays in his barn. Jed Parker, his old friend, came by to warn him. "They'll turn on you, Caleb," Jed said, leaning heavy against the fence. "Folks remember old blood too well. You're risking more than you reckon." Even Sheriff Boone came again, his tone sterner. "Last warning, Whitlock. This'll end bad if you keep it up." Each word struck Caleb with shame, yet he could not force himself to cast them out. He had known loneliness too well to inflict it upon others. The sister's silent trust felt like a fragile ember in his hands, and he would not let it die. Then, one night, as stars pricked the heavens and coyotes howled on the ridges, a rider came. She moved like a shadow, her figure wrapped in the dark, her horse weary from long miles. When she dismounted, the firelight revealed her face, Maya, the girl's mother. Her eyes were deep wells of sorrow, her frame thin but unbroken. She stepped forward with a dignity that silenced even the crickets. Caleb froze as she felt her knees before him. "You have saved what was mine," she whispered, her voice a song cut with grief. "And now, a debt must be repaid." The words hung in the night like thunder before the storm, leaving Caleb staring into the fire's glow, knowing the world around him had shifted into something far heavier than he had yet understood. Maya's words lingered in the air, heavy as the desert heat. Caleb shifted uneasily, the weight of her gaze pressing on him. He had expected thanks, perhaps tears, but not this. Not the language of debts and repayment. "Ain't no debt owed," he muttered, voice rough, almost ashamed. "Decency don't call for bargains." But Maya only lifted her head, her dark eyes steady. "Among my people, a life saved is a life carried. If not by me, then by my daughters. We do not walk away owing breath to another." Nayeli stiffened at her mother's words, her jaw set. Talisa reached for Caleb's hand, as if begging him not to vanish into some new bargain struck over her head. Caleb pulled back gently, shaking his head. "I won't have it," he said, more firmly now. "I took you in because it was right. That's all." But even as he spoke, he felt the truth of Maya's presence settle into the ranch like a quiet storm. She stayed, silent as shadow, her watchful eyes measuring every act, every hesitation. Caleb began to feel judged, not by scorn but by something deeper, as if she were weighing his soul against the world's cruelty. One evening, Nayeli confronted him, her voice brittle with the sharpness of youth. "Why risk your standing for us? You could have left us where we lay." Caleb stared into the dying fire before answering, his words slow, pulled from an old wound. "Because I know what it is to be left." Her face softened then, the hard mask cracking. For the first time, she did not look at him as a stranger, but as someone who carried his own scars. But the town's eyes never turned away. Clara's voice rose louder in the saloon, venom dripping from every syllable. "He's gone wild, keeping them Apache girls like kin." Men gathered around her, drink thickening their courage. The whispers reached a fever pitch until they spilled into the street one night. Caleb had just tied his horse when 3 men stepped from the shadows outside the saloon. Their faces gleamed with drink and disdain. "Time's come to send him back where they belong, Whitlock," one sneered. "Ain't fit for you to play nursemaid to savages." Caleb's blood ran cold, but he stood firm. "They'll not be turned out." The first blow came swift, a fist slamming into his jaw. He staggered but did not fall. Boots struck ribs, fists cracked against bone, but still he stayed upright, each breath a vow he could not break. At last, Sheriff Boone waded in, pushing the men back with curses. He helped Caleb to his feet, eyes grim. "Can't keep doing this," the sheriff muttered. "I can't hold him off forever." Caleb, bruised and bleeding, said nothing. He walked home beneath a sky strewn with stars, each step slower than the last. But when he reached the ranch, he found the sisters waiting in the yard, their faces pale with fear, yet lit with something stronger, steadfastness. They did not speak, but the way they looked at him told him the beating had not been in vain. From that night, small acts bloomed like wildflowers in the dust. Maya left food by his fire, stews rich with herbs that filled the house with scents long absent. Nayeli whispered his sister's name back to him when he spoke of her, honoring the ghost he carried. Talisa placed wildflowers on his porch each morning, their fragile beauty declaring silently, "We are here, we are grateful, we are yours." It was no longer a question of guest or host. Something deeper was binding them, kinship born not of blood, but of survival, of shared silence, of pain met with tenderness. But the town would not relent. Word spread of a gathering, a mob forming, fueled by liquor and fear, intent on forcing Caleb's hand. The night they came, torches flared against the dark, their light casting the desert in angry gold. Sheriff Boone stood at the edge, his face troubled, but he did not lift a hand to stop them. Caleb stepped out to meet them, his body still marked by bruises, his voice carrying the weight of something unshakable. "I'll not cast out what God's placed in my care," he said, steady as the land itself. The mob shifted, muttering, their bravado flickering like torch flames in the wind. Clara's sharp voice rang out, but even she faltered under the calm in his stance, the battered dignity he wore like armor. Then Maya stepped to his side, her daughters at her skirts. She did not speak, but her presence was thunder enough. Together they stood, not as savior and saved, but as something whole. The silence broke the mob's fury. One by one, men lowered their torches, their courage crumbling against the simple, unyielding truth of family chosen. They drifted away into the dark, their whispers scattering like dust. When dawn broke, it found the ranch still standing, unburned, alive with quiet laughter. Caleb leaned against the fence, ribs aching, watching Maya and her daughters gather water at his well. Talisa's giggle rang out. Naeli's hair caught the sunlight, and Maya, her face gentled by morning light, looked back at him and nodded. No words passed, but an unspoken vow bridged the space between them. For the first time in years, Caleb felt the warmth of kinship settle in his chest. Not as a savior, not as a man owed a debt, simply as one who had chosen, and been chosen in return. And if you listen close, like an old soul whispering in the quiet, the story leaves you with this. Sometimes the debts we fear are not chains but gifts. In saving another, we find ourselves saved. And in the small mercies of shared bread, in bruised hands held steady, in laughter long delayed, we learn that family is not only born, but made in the dust and dawn of this world.